The shelf looks crooked to me. I'm going to check it when I have this. I think it is crooked. More art, crit, lit, crit, film, crit. Crit. Oh, also, I finished Heart of Darkness, so I'll post a video about that in a minute. Local Color, A Sense of Place in Folk Art by William Ferris. I spent time in Seal and Pittsview, Alabama with the folk artist Butch Anthony. Folk art is really cool. You know, you could spend a very interesting conference panel trying to define it and differentiate it from regular art, but it achieves miracles just like art from more known artists. This is an oral history. 64 Hollywood professionals talking about the biz. Oral histories are very interesting to me. Interviews with the interviewer cut out, collected. I've been working on one myself. It's a chapter of my larger book. I might have read this. I think I did, but I can't remember very well. Long ago. But it looks into the finding of a new Shakespeare poem and proves that Shakespeare wrote a poem that wasn't previously attributed to him. That's cool. A book about Uncle Tom's Cabin. I was just thinking the other day, I don't own Uncle Tom's Cabin, even though it's this book that changed the course of U.S. history and got a lot of clueless white people to start thinking about the real lives of people that look different than them. And when Lincoln met Harriet Beecher Stowe, he was like, here's the person that started this war. Simple Twist of Fate about Bob Dylan. Since it's about blood on the tracks, this would probably make a good sequel to The Complete Unknown that was just in the theaters, which made the baffling choice of combining two very famous concerts into one. Like, every freaking fan is going to know you're doing that. That's just weird. And then Dylan signed off on that movie? Does he not care? Is he just like, yeah, build the myth? Interesting. I mean, I did like that movie, but Paradise Lost and its critics. Yeah, I like these books where it talks about how a work is received. I read this one about Moby Dick called Dive Deeper that was incredible. Yeah, I mean, why make stuff up if you're writing nonfiction? To me, that is lazy. You don't need to do that. This is an incredible work of art criticism and synthesis. It's just so cool. I got so much out of this book. I felt reading this book like Thomas McEvilley must be like the Carl Sagan of art in modern times. He talks about it in that same way, that same like populist way, that way that makes you think it's really important what we're talking about here, actually. Art and Discontent, Theory of the Millennium. I can't even remember that many specifics from this book, but I just remember it freed my thinking up for a while, and that reading it was a pleasure. I started reading this, and it was kind of interesting. Guys from Strasbourg. My podcast has, I don't know, 10 listeners or something, this Albuquerque podcast I do, but one of them happens to be from France, and he comes and visits us once in a while. And his name is Jean-Yves, and he's from Strasbourg, and it's this really interesting town that has this sort of dual French and German identity in some ways because it's close to a border. And anyway, our friend Jean-Yves has been trying to go to all the Strasbourgs and photograph them in the world because it's a name that gets repeated. But this is, you know, anytime people are talking about style or, I don't know, I need to study theater and drama. I've got a drama chapter I want to write in book 2 of the big book I've been working on. One chapter will be a play, a depressing play. But this one, what I gathered, I only started this book. It's like a dual memoir and work of criticism, thinking about what works and what doesn't in the theater. And that's just storytelling, so that's useful for any writer to hear. Greek art, its development, character, and influence. Pretty cool. Tony Hoagland. He and I were in the same issue of Tin House a long time ago. We both did events at Bookworks, a local bookstore, around the same time. And he passed on a really nice note to me about my piece of writing in Tin House, so that was pretty cool. made my life back in the day. Rituals and ceremonies in popular culture. I love this kind of stuff. It collects academic works about really obscure stuff. I bet this book would pair well with Barbara Ehrenreich's Dancing in the Streets, A History of Collective Joy, which I can never hold on to a copy of. When I get one again, I'll put them together. Like, books like this are fascinating. There's a chapter on the roast. There's a chapter on minstrelsy. Miami's Little Havana. Yard Shrines, Cult Religion, and Landscape. Sam Phillips, one of the great producers of rock and roll. That one sounds kind of like a pop song. He said to Elvis, as Elvis stumbled into That's All Right Mama, his version. He had just such a wonderful, recognizable, echoey sound, that Sun Studios sound. You know it the second you hear it, or even when anyone's paying homage to it, like Wilco with Far, Far Away. Roger Ebert's The Great Movies books. These are good books. I especially like the first one. Full of good recommends, generally. Andy Kaufman. It's pretty interesting. My younger sibling always reminded me of Andy Kaufman, so I've been very interested in Andy Kaufman. Yeah, my younger sibling, who's still awesome, but back in 2001, pretended to have an invisible romantic partner going around everywhere with this invisible romantic partner for a while. Another time was a robot for a long time. PXR 608 12 2027. We all had to memorize the name. But Kaufman was like a real fun, original, interesting presence. You'd be like, you probably know him from Jim Carrey playing him in Man in the Moon. And I mean, bits like, and now I'm going to read the whole Great Gatsby. Everyone would laugh, and then he would. This is just one of my favorite music books ever. I love this book so much. It's a great work of music writing. It's a great work of history. It's incredible. It's a great work of sociology. Can't Stop, Won't Stop, A History of the Hip Hop Generation by Jeff Chang. You got to read this one. It's so good. And full of great recommends. Pictures at a Revolution, 5 movies and the birth of New Hollywood. Oh yeah, I was getting every book about the movie Bonnie and Clyde. I was like, how much could you learn about a movie? And how would it change your viewing experience to have read literally everything about it? So I picked Bonnie and Clyde because, I mean, I liked it, but also there's a lot written about it. And I learned a ton, and it did totally transform my vision of the movie. It was not a worthless experiment. I read this for a class forever ago, but I remember it was one of my favorites that I read for that class. Rock and Psychedelics in the 1960s. There's some great, like, quoted Beatles and Bob Dylan press conferences and things like that in here, and a lot of good insights and music trivia. It's a good survey and analysis of a time. I have a couple of these old Talking Heads books I inherited from my older sister. I love Talking Heads. They're a great band. All-time favorite. But these books are awesome because they end on a high note when the band is still together and everyone's getting along, and it's like they're like, who knows what they'll do next. It's great. This book is from my older sister's collection. I think 1 or 2% of my books comes from that collection. I mean, not quite 1%, but a percentage. And yeah, awesome person who introduced me to really being into books and music and nature and art and all that good stuff. Yeah, my older sister. R.I.P. We've all got those people, gone too soon. I love the Odyssey so much. This book intrigues me. The story of the Odyssey. I think this has like real locations, and this is just a cool work of literary criticism. It walks you right through the whole story with the details and stuff. Cool. The Odyssey is one of those stories that you can never read enough versions of or learn enough about. It's just so foundational. Robert Louis Stevenson, such a crisp writer. Incredible. So precise. Makes me think, oh my gosh, we're all just walking around saying the most general paraphrases. Writers of other times were thinking so sharp, specifically. And a lot of them, I mean, they were writing these things in a few drafts too, at most. When I think of how much I labor over something on a computer, I'm like, can't imagine just doing a few drafts back in the day. By Lettuce Cooper. I didn't know that was the name. That's cool. I had my backpack stolen while I was reading Robert Louis Stevenson by a creek back in 2001. All my stuff in it. Had to live out of a trash bag for a couple of days. With a few donated items in it. Yeah, so I'll always associate him with that. But it's not his fault. The Psychopath Test, A Journey Through the Madness Industry by John Ronson. He wrote this really interesting book called Them, where he lived with all these fringe people on the edges of society. And that was very interesting. And he seems like a real gonzo researcher who's willing to go really far to write the story he wants to write. A Louis Theroux type. That's awesome. When I read this, he did a lot of radio interviews when this came out, and some of them made an impression on me. That's probably why I picked this up. Igor Stravinsky, an autobiography. Composer who started riots with his Rites of Spring. Really, it was just people who were trying to enjoy it, fighting with people that didn't like it. But still, it's good soundbite. I already have an epistolary chapter in book one of my book, but if I had, I don't know, it'd be cool to study the best of these letters, the world's great letters. Treasury, that's so awesome. From ancient days to our own time. It'd be cool to study the best letters and Diogenes. Good old Diogenes. Oh, Christopher Columbus reports his first impressions of America. I read some of those in A People's History of the United States from Howard Zinn. They were not too great. These people are docile and could be easily enslaved. Like, dude, this is not going to age well. Well, I love books like that. A collection of the world's great letters. That's like a literary form I don't think about too much. But if you read surveys of literature, the epistle, like especially about distant reading, where you take really big picture looks at it all, you'll see the epistolary novel used to be the number one form for books. I mean, very, very common books of letters, because people wrote so many letters. This book is really incredible. I think it's famous in certain circles and unheard of everywhere else. The Anti-Aesthetic Essays on Postmodern Culture. I think it came out in the 83. Toward a Critical Regionalism, 6 Points for an Architecture of Resistance by Kenneth Frampton. That was really good. I read that one. I read all these. I read this book twice, and I really got a lot out of it. I was really into conceptual art, and I still kind of am. It's fantastic, and it's good to think about. Abstract art. I was really into abstract expressionism for a little while, and there's a lot of good stuff in this book, both visually and informationally. I have definitely spent some time with that book, and I think I'll read that one cover to cover sometime. This turned up in another shelf and got moved, apparently. That's annoying. Jeanette Winterson, Art Objects. I like when people I know are really good write about the craft. Much appreciated. Cows, Pigs, Wars, and Witches. The Rubble of Culture. One of America's leading anthropologists offers solutions to the perplexing question of why people behave the way they do. Of all the books on that shelf, these are the three I recommend the most highly. Like, they're just classics in all their own way. And if you're an artist or a writer of any sort, they'll expand your world. They'll make you think bigger picture stuff. And they're just all great and provocative in their own ways. Lovely, lovely books. All right, I'm going to review Heart of Darkness soon. And I've got 75 followers, which is 3/4 of 100. And 100 is only a couple of zeros away from 10,000. So basically, I've got all the followers. Woo! All right, thanks for following, those of you that are. Much appreciated. Appreciate y'all. You're all cool.